and we have Alex as well. So you'll hear from our speakers shortly. I'll do a very brief introduction of the Governance Hub members. We'll do a bit of an icebreaker, see where you're from, how are you feeling today. A bit of a test on, not a test, a check on your level of experience in systems innovation, just to help us pitch the presentations and the questions properly. And then we'll dive straight into it. Just a point on the actual panel presentations and the questions. If we can just hold our questions and write them on either post-it notes or the Miro board, which we, if it hasn't been shared, it will be imminently.
Share that on the chat.
And then we'll put the questions to the panel members after both sessions have been completed. If you don't have access to the Miro board, that's completely fine. Just drop your questions in the Zoom chat. But without further ado, I'm Isaac Riley. I'm in Canberra in Australia at the moment. It's just gone 8 p.m. It's very cold, hence my background keeping me toasty warm. My other two Governance Hub members, Martin and Marielle. I'll just throw to Martin to give a brief. Sorry, is that a question or just a rogue mic?
If you're not speaking, switch off your microphone.
It's I just know which.
There's some background noise here from someone. So grateful for that. Great. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. So I'll throw it to Marielle. I'll throw it to you for a brief introduction.
Yeah. So I'm part of this Governance Hub core group organizing these events, and my background is as an economist. I'm based in Sweden, and finally we have summer here, so that's why I've put up some grass in the background. We're very thrilled about that. So I'm currently running a new strategic innovation program that is looking at how we can make the public sector become this kind of enabler in the sustainability transition. So I'm very excited about learning from other places around the globe on how we get from a theories and a vision to actually embed new ways of working in practice. So that's really my motivation for being here.
Very well. And Martin.
Hello, everybody. Martin Lens Fitzgerald here, calling from Amsterdam. I'm a team manager here at the City of Amsterdam. And yeah, if you look at the government, you know it's complex. And there's only one way to serve complexity, and that is to understand the system and serve that. And you do that through innovation, through design, through many things. And hey, why not do it together right here? And that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Martin. So just jump quickly into a bit of an icebreaker, just to get you familiar with the board, get familiar with each other, check where everyone's coming from today. I think we have quite a broad global participant list today. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see just a bit of a matrix. Grab a dot that corresponds to your color and place it in the quadrant about, and place it on the globe for where you're calling from today.
This is always very exciting to see where people are coming from.
Yeah, watching there's a European hub there. I think anybody's crossed the equator yet.
Yeah, I think we need to work on our diversity.
Identity in Western Europe there. What have we got? A lot of green, that's good.
And if you can't use Miro, please put your location in the chat.
It's great to see so many with high energy here. Good.
Right.
Stuff.
Look at that.
Down, but we are very densely within Western Europe.
We got one Australian, Catalina.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And Pakistan, see?
Wow. Fantastic.
All right. Now, next one. Just want to get an idea of your two things. So two axes on this matrix. Across the x-axis, your level of experience in the public sector, and then the y, your level of experience in system innovation. Grab a blue dot and throw it on the graph there, please.
Such a quiet exercise.
I have to say, I'd love to be a systems ninja, but
Working into it.
going forward, perhaps.
Then you're water. You like water.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. It's a bit of a different spread from last time. The last time in session 1 of this series, we had almost perfectly linear from bottom left to top right in that graph. But quite a different distribution today.
Fabulous.
Excellent. Okay, well, if you haven't finished, please do drop your dot on there. But I will move on to our case studies, which is why we are here. First up today is we've got Alex Fleming from the UK Policy Lab, going to give us a bit of an overview of a fantastic case study in the UK over a period of 9 months or so. So, Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Isaac. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, I cannot share whilst it's being shared by someone else. So I don't know who's sharing the Miro board. If they could stop sharing, then I can share. Perfect. Thank you. So if I share my screen, this should work. Share. There we are. Okay. Let me find what I am sharing. Okay, hi. So my name is Alex Fleming. I'm from Policy Lab. I'll explain a little bit about that in a moment. I'm a designer, strategic designer. I don't have a lifetime's experience with systems, but systems design, systems innovation is an approach that I want to share with you that we use in Policy Lab, that we use in governments, that I think would be beneficial. So I'm going to talk to you about a project called Changing Futures. So in the UK government, there's a pot of money called the Shared Outcomes Fund, and it's run by Treasury. And if there's a particularly complex problem that spans multiple departments, then at a time you could apply for money for this to tackle this complex project. And we worked with a team in, it says DLUC there, which is the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, to tackle an issue around multiple disadvantage. So people who are experiencing multiple disadvantage are those who are cycling through, experiencing really horrendous stuff. So cycling through substance use, homelessness, our criminal justice systems, lots of mental health issues, and experiencing domestic violence, to name but a few of the issues that this kind of group of people in our society are experiencing. There's around 360,000 of this kind of people experiencing like multiple issues like this in the UK, but also, it to be quite brutal, like the services that we deliver to them cost quite a lot to deliver. They're quite expensive to society. So it's really crucial that we wanted to serve them better, to help them have better outcomes, to live longer, to be members of our society who are valued. And we did this through working with 125 people across like 6 different government departments listed there, plus the NHS, frontline workers who are working with these people, voluntary sector, voluntary and community sector organisations, which is the VCS on the screen there, different local authorities, and a group of people who have got lived experience of multiple disadvantage. So there's this huge issue that spans lots of different government departments, but also there's lots of different moving parts and intersecting organisations across from the front line all the way up to very senior levels in government. So I will just pause a moment to introduce Policy Lab. So some of you might have heard of Policy Lab, but we are a small team. There's about 30 of us in national government, and our mission is to radically improve policymaking through design, innovation, and people-centered approaches. It's quite broad, but essentially we work with teams across government to bring those approaches and improve policymaking for end users, which might be people, it might be industry, and so on. So we're 10 years old this year, and we've worked over 200 projects. We've worked with nearly every government department, plus more broadly, other organisations that might be local government, arm's length bodies in the UK, like the UK Space Agency, or sorry, there's little notifications popping up. Greater London Authority, the UN, and so on. And we do a number of different things. So we do training in government, we do kind of short sprints that might be just day-long things. We have much larger policy projects, which this is one of, and we're really kind of thought leaders in terms of future methods for policy making. So we do lots of learning and testing, and work at different stages in the policy making cycle. So changing futures. So this project concluded last year. We were working with multiple departments, and we started with this big question of kind of what is central government's role in improving services or enabling something that we know works for people experiencing multiple disadvantage, which is like flexible care. What do we do with that? Where do we go? And we grappled with this question, and we took kind of it's a huge systems question. We took 2 systems approaches to this. And I'm going to just really briefly introduce you to these. You might be familiar with them. But the first is 3 horizons. And if you've used the 3 horizons before, it's really a helpful tool in thinking about transformation and understanding different possible ways of thinking about the future. So if you look at these axes, prevalence up the side, time along the bottom, the first red line is your business as usual line. So that is a horizon in which is kind of the status quo at the moment, what the system looks like. The third horizon is that viable future. So perhaps where you want to get to, or what do you want the business as usual system to look like in the future? But to get to that business as usual, there's also this horizon 2, which is thinking about innovation, steps, interventions. It's often called like disruptive innovation, but the word disruptive itself we have to be careful about what language are you using government, but so innovation, steps, and interventions is quite a helpful way of thinking about it. And we used this this is the first framework we used, and then the second thing that we used was something called the 4 keys to systems innovation, and this was developed by Charles Leadbeater and Jenny Winhall, and there's a variety of elements to it that I won't go into, but something that we found really helpful is if you think about those 3 horizons, actually there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say about business as usual, and you can really get bogged down in kind of mapping and getting every detail. But to cut through that complexity, it's really helpful to think about these 4 things. So in terms of if you want to see big change, if you want to see shifts, some helpful starters are to think about what's the purpose and the system's working to, where do you want it to be, what do you see around power in the system, who holds the power, and so on. In terms of relationships, what do they look like? And then thinking about the future, what do you want them to look like? What do you need them to look like for your system to function better? And then resource flows. So what are the resources in the system that are valued? How are they flowing? How are they used? Where are the feedback loops, and so on. So that's what we did. We took those 2 frameworks alongside a number of other things. So this wasn't just like a systems project. We drew in a lot of co-design methodologies, ethnography. So spending a lot of time with people with lived experience to understand their experience. We worked with an artist. There's lots of different elements that I won't have time to talk about. But the first thing that we did was we gathered a lot of evidence. There's a huge amount of evidence in this field, and asked this multidisciplinary group of people from all around the sector, different government departments, different levels of seniority, to almost collectively spend a little bit of time reviewing the evidence. And we, in Policy Lab, we don't give people long reports. We kind of distill down things into pictures and small cards, so it's quite quick to kind of go through, and it's very visual, and it's on the wall. And we ask people to reflect individually, but then come together in these multi-stakeholder groups to map not just the what was happening in the current system, like a rich picture map. We were quite specific in saying, can you map firstly the relationship? So put yourself on this map. We gave them concentric circles of national government around the edge, the kind of local government and services, and then the person in the middle. Put yourself on the map and then map your relationships. Then let's map the power, where that sits, how it's used. Let's map the purposes that people are working towards. And let's map the resources and how they flow. And this is a picture from one of the workshops, but this is kind of a map in progress of how they are doing that. And that was really able to not only give us some kind of really useful insight, it was very powerful for the people in the room, in those small groups of kind of worked in groups of 6 to do this, to see the work happening in silos, to see that actually everyone felt they didn't have any power, but everyone held a little bit of power, to see the problems with resource flow up and down, down, and no kind of knowledge flowing back, and so on all the different purposes that departments were working towards. We then worked with the same group of people to think about what is that viable future. So where's that future being imagined now? Where is it visible? And we worked with this group of people with lived experience to almost design future narratives. So they themselves wrote what it might be like to experience based on kind of there's stuff written about what an ideal system might look like that's more theory and things like that, but what from different perspectives, but what for them would be a really good experience if they were experiencing multiple disadvantage. What would that experience of services and so on be like? So they wrote these kind of personal narratives, which we shared with this multi-stakeholder group, and gave people empathy, but also ownership over that future, and really an opportunity to contribute to it. So from that, they were really able to articulate what would those 4 keys, power, purpose, relationships, and resource flows, look like in a future in which people's experience was that. And it's a very powerful thing to do. And then alongside that, we helped, we created a space for people to create. So what are the values that underpin that future? So we co-created this set of values. And then from that, so we had this kind of understanding of what was going on in the present. We had a future to work towards, but how are we going to get there? What are the things that would enable us to get there? And we worked again with this group of people, and then it was over 9 months. We had 5 face-to-face big workshops, but also multiple conversations, meetings, smaller groups to develop innovations and interventions that central government could do to create. I was just doing a time check, sorry, to enable movement towards this future and towards a system which people with multiple disadvantage would experience better and flexible support and care. And so we created 5 interventions, which we tested both in the field and in workshop settings. And I think what was really interesting about these interventions is in government, I think we often want to jump to what's the regulation that needs changing, what's the new service that's going to be delivered, what's the fund, what's the new stream of money that's going to come in. But what we and this was quite organic. The interventions that emerged were different ways of being together. So let me unpick that a little bit. When we think about something, we worked with an organization called Making Every Adult Matter, which is a network organization that supports kind of the homelessness sector. And the director of that said, you know, sometimes you can just walk into an area and kind of know if it's going to have good outcomes for people or better outcomes for people experiencing multiple disadvantage. And he said, but that counts for nothing. You know, you've got outcome frameworks, you need to do paperwork, you need to have everything joining up. And so we took that insight, and there was a number of insights that were kind of similar around that theme. And we thought, well, you know, like, what is that about? Can we articulate what that healthy system, what that well-functioning system looks like? And we created something called the healthy system indicators. That's what you can see in front of you, or with little balls on sticks. We're testing it in a workshop setting here, but essentially came up with 11 criteria which enables a system in which supports people facing multiple disadvantage to function really well. And they are things like having a learning culture, working in partnership, having the right people around the table, having the voice of lived experience in the room. And what those, and so that essentially is a different way that a local area or a place can be together. Rather than telling a local area exactly how to operate, you're giving them the framework to help them to reimagine their system with a kind of stewardship from national government. And there was a number of other kind of interventions, not the same as that, but pushing into that direction. So what was the impact? Did we shift the system in 9 months? Well, the first thing I'd say is that there was kind of three strong impacts. The first was, I think when we started the project, we thought we'll come up with some interventions and there'll be the government, the policy team can just implement, but there was kind of 3 things that were really core in the impact. The first was this vision and values that we'd co-created really enabled the policy team to think about how they were making decisions moving forward, and were really instrumental in them forming their team culture, but also what they were investing in, thinking about how they were sharing with different policy teams, how they themselves were operating. And they were almost being that example, being that beacon moving forward and out of the project that is really valuable, and having a North Star to work towards. The second was building a coalition. So we worked with a huge variety of people all across the system, which is incredibly rare in government. I think there's often not time to do a piece of work like this. But what we were able to do is like break down, firstly, silos, but also the way that people interact and address each other. So because of funding and because of the way I don't know if this is true in other governments, but people will often meet someone from another policy team and you're almost there to defend your policy area. and make sure you're not committing to any extra spending or commitments because of pressures. But people were really able to join the conversation at a different level. There was a lot of generosity in the room, in lots of relationships that were built through physically. I think physically being together was really valuable at multiple spaces and places, but also just being together across different levels and different organizations. And I think what was really incredible is in the last workshop, there was a number of new people who joined, and they almost walk in the room a little bit defensive, but immediately see how the culture is working, see how people are sharing, and are enabled very quickly to like understand what's happening and feel like they can be welcomed and brought on board in it. And that coalition has been really valuable in not only taking forward some of the work from this project, but also the people involved in this starting other smaller projects that are of a similar ilk. And lastly, the multiple interventions. So we had these 5 prototypes. One of them currently has been we've been further testing and is about to be rolled out. But essentially we created these ideas, and there was further that we didn't have capacity within the project to test, that we were then able to map together to work out how they worked and to share to enable this, to enable the Changing Futures team to think about how to shift the system, what actions are need to take next. And what's interesting is these interventions have formed like the basis of a roadmap or a core part of the basis of a roadmap for this Changing Futures team moving forward. And towards the end of the project, and partly as a result of this, they were able to secure additional funding. So did we shift the system? No, not in 9 months. But I'll just talk a little bit about what we did do and how that worked. So I don't think, I think being able to shift a system in 9 months, good luck. It's a tricky and long-term piece of investment. But I think what we were really able to do is accelerate national government's role in shifting the system for people facing multiple disadvantage. So this project, Changing Futures, and our work, Policy Lab and Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, was built on a huge amount of hard work over the past like 10 years from an organisation called, the Big Lottery, the Community Fund, had a programme called Fulfilling Lives. That was a precursor to Changing Futures, where they were really trying to understand what worked for people experiencing multiple disadvantage, very well funded, and had lots of research come out of it, began to build some of those coalitions. There was an organisation called Kelly Chase who 10 years ago did a piece of work being able to articulate what multiple disadvantage was, and there's huge amounts of wealth of experience in the sector as well. So we came to it knowing all that, and there was a lot of momentum and a desire to see this happen, a desire to see national government make some changes. At the same time as Changing Futures, there was a few years ago, Dame Carol Black was instrumental in setting up the Joint Combating Drugs Unit, which was a real recognition that the issues of multiple disadvantage are interconnected. So thinking about joining up like mental health and criminal justice and substance use as issues. So there's already a joint unit in government who were involved in this and bought into it. So there was that, bringing that momentum. At the same time, those things underneath, there's this in the UK culture, there's been a real, over the past 10, 15 years, awareness of mental health issues, a kind of normalization of that. There's been rising homelessness in the UK, so that's become more on the political agenda. So this kind of bigger stuff happening that we could key into. And then at the same time, there's some incredible stuff that we had nothing to do with, like not micro innovations, but innovations in the system. So there's an amazing organisation in Plymouth called the Plymouth Alliance, where they are really transforming services for people experiencing multiple disadvantage, and taking a lot of the challenges from government and working at a strategic level. So they're not felt on the ground. And the same in Essex, the Essex Recovery Foundation as well. And during the project, Tesco, which is a big UK supermarket, decided to train all of their frontline staff in the East Midlands, on multiple disadvantage and how to care for customers better who were experiencing multiple disadvantage in a really relational way. So there's like things happening around the system that enabled us to kind of key into. So if you look back at the three horizons, what you can see is it wasn't just Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. These are not strategically placed on here, they're more thrown on. But it's not just us in this space. There's lots of other things going on. But what the project enabled to do is for national government to understand their role in shifting the system and accelerate their work in this area, and have some actions and innovations and steps that can move towards that viable future and decide what to kind of hospice and stop investing in a little bit, to enable and thinking about government as an enabler. Thinking about things like the Essex Recovery Foundation, the Plymouth Alliance, even Tesco's work, where government can elevate or talk about, or even financially think about in the future, planning to like invest in some of the work that is pushing towards that viable future. They had that framework for the project. And just very lastly, that was a big piece of work that took 9 months. We also, those the interventions that we talked about developing. This is a picture of some stakeholders in the northeast of England, and we took one of our interventions to them and enabled them to, they arrived from all different services. These are people who work within the sector, health, housing, criminal justice and so on, and enabled them to reimagine what their local system would look like and replan resources and power and think about moving towards a system that would support people facing multiple disadvantage. And incredibly, in about 6 hours, they were able to almost do the mini project that had taken us a long time to take them through that thought process of working in silos and all the problems, to thinking about how can we collaborate better? How can we have a generosity mindset rather than this scarcity, defensive mindset? And by the end of the day, they were thinking about pooling resources. They were thinking about working in a very different way, which was a really incredible kind of testament to the narrative of the project, and have taken that to multiple different areas now to share. We are still learning, and we learn through doing. So I'm not suggesting this is the answer to everything, but that's some little insights. And just to say, we've created 4 blogs as a kind of learning piece off the back of our work, and they should be in the Miro board, and they are around kind of what our framework is for shifting government systems. We've got a game to help people understand the 4 keys and 3 horizons and shifting systems. There is a something about the healthy systems indicators, which I talked about, and a tool that you can kind of use and test and see if think if it's something that you're interested in, and also like a guide to working with lived experience in policy making. But I will stop now. I've talked for far too long. So thank you so much for listening.
That was fabulous, Alex. Thank you so much for that. That's the second time I've heard it, and I got even more out of it this time around. But yeah, really appreciate it, Alex. Just quickly, a reminder that we do have, if you've got questions, just throw them on the Miro board or in the chat, and we'll throw them on the Miro board for you, for each of the panelists. We will jump to the second case study in a second, which is case study 2, or the OECD on the Miro board. We'll have a short break after the second case study, and then we'll come back with some questions for the panelists. We'll put the questions on the board and invite questions from participants today as well. And finally, we'll finish with what we've termed a call to action. So how can we actually bring this into reality? It's the unofficial motto of the hub. It's bridging aspiration to reality. So what some of the first steps we can take to apply these tools in our own space. So I'd like to introduce Mariana and Sabrina.
Good afternoon. Okay, I'm going first, Mariana. Am I sharing my screen, or is there a compiled PowerPoint?
You can show your screen if you have it open.
Yeah.
Then give me 2 seconds, sorry.
I can maybe just introduce myself in the meantime, and I will talk later so that I don't introduce myself again. My name is Mariana. I work at the OECD, and I sit at the Environment Directorate working on climate change. The mission of our team is to support countries, regions, and cities develop their net zero strategies, and we do that by taking a systems and a challenge-led approach, and we'll let you know in a little bit.
Mariana, do you mind sharing your screen, actually? Sorry.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Maybe explain the OECD as well, Mariana or Sabrina.
I don't think I'm Dublin City Council, so I'm a local authority person. I can't explain those things.
Give me 1 sec. So basically the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is an international organization of 38 member countries. And you can think about it as a forum where countries, regions, and cities exchange good practices and lessons learned on policy. That's kind of the short introduction of it. Let me share the screen, and you let me know when to click, Sabrina, and I will do that for you.
Perfect. So this is just a bit of background to how we engaged Mariana. So Mariana came to my attention in the work they were doing because they were working with the Irish government, specifically the Climate Change Advisory Council that we have set up in Ireland that is meant to objectively review Ireland's progress on climate change. And I happened to be on the Secretariat before joining Dublin City Council. So the way Ireland works is very much through people. So Gemma had asked me to be one of the people that Mariana interviewed, and I don't know whether Mariana regrets interviewing me or not, because now she's been stuck with me for probably the better part of 2 years now. So I probably owe her a massive dinner and everything at this point. So following from that, during the time that work was going on, Dublin City Council was applying to join the EU mission for 100 climate neutral and smart cities. So as they were doing their last workshop, it was announced that Dublin and Cork were both successful. And then that's how this process started. But I'll ask for Mariana to put the next slide through, which I think is actually just kind of what we're going to talk about. So I'll give you a little bit more on the context of why, and then I'll hand it over to Mariana to go through the systems approach. And then we'll come back to both of us about what we're doing concretely. Next slide, please. So the why. We had our first plan, which I was also involved in writing. Just a bit of background to myself. Prior to joining Dublin City Council, I moved to Ireland because obviously I am not Irish. I have a Canadian accent. I was charmed into doing my PhD here. And so I decided to look at how cities are responding to climate action and through a collaborative planning lens. So then finishing my PhD, I landed pretty much the perfect job working for Dublin's energy agency to develop the climate action plans for the 4 local authorities of Dublin. This is what we ended up with. And the pushing for this is like initially a plan and a strategy was done that kind of highlighted very siloed approaches to taking climate action. So we're going to look at planning, we're going to look at waste, we were going to look at energy, and very separate in transport. So it was a bit of negotiation to get it to this point, to have the idea with this arch, if anybody's familiar with the social determinants of health, this is kind of where it came from. So the idea is that in the center of it is City Council and the other 3 local authorities, how we respond, how we demonstrate leadership through our operations and service delivery, and how we influence through it. So it meant to radiate out. So if the social determinants of health, it was the individual, the community, the wider environment, the world. But for us, the idea was to have actions that were interconnected. So energy and buildings would be influenced by transport. We'd also have to consider flood resilience. But I think towards the flood resilience, nature-based solutions, and resource management, those link a little bit more closely. But there's also a link to energy and buildings. So resource management was about having how we use resources as a whole, so nature, water, so wind to flood, and as well as energy. The unfortunate thing, though, is it's great to write a plan as an external organization and go, this is fabulous, you know, good luck, see you later, it's done, how you go. Then a few jobs later, I ended up working for Dublin City Council about a year and a half into the plan actually being implemented. And it's a very humbling experience to be on the inside and then responsible for actually understanding how you wrote something and what you were thinking. And just to say, like, it wasn't developed in a vacuum, the original one. There was a lot of sitting down with about 100 staff across the local authorities individually, bringing them into rooms, getting them to come up with the actions themselves. But I think one of the things that stood out to me as I was trying to deal with the most horrendous spreadsheet of my life, which had about 219 actions on it, and getting everybody to report on individual indicators and how they were doing, chasing them up so that we could report to our council. One of the groups just kind of said, like, specifically, you know, there's no strategy to this. So recognizing that that was one of the biggest challenges in trying to introduce a systems approach, it wasn't very systems oriented. There was weak links, but how do we go from that? So the next slide, taking the opportunity that we had to develop a new climate action plan, and that we actually had to really think about how the systems come together and how we actually see the linkages. We actually we moved away from thematic areas to actually more clustered actions. And the good news is, because our councillors are very active and very vocal, and it's been a bit of a learn. I think it's been an interesting experience getting people to be open to that idea of constructive feedback and, you know, saying if you don't like something. So one person internally said, you know, it's not strategic. Councillors, every time I would take my giant spreadsheet and report on it, the way we were reporting on it was either actions were completed, they were new, they were in progress, they were ongoing. Councillors had issues with 90% of the actions being ongoing because, you know, they have to vote, get people to vote for them. It doesn't look good when things are ongoing. We want projects completed. How do we get going here? So, but those 90% of ongoing actions are the work that we do every day to keep the city ticking along. So they're still important, so you can't ignore them. But recognizing that you have to communicate that a bit better. So that was one thing we were kind of taking back. So we took those 90% of the actions, and we've actually created another category that's just operations and service delivery, but they still have carbon footprint. So it's more about how do we keep these things going, but also communicate better how their climate action, how they support the main body of actions that now make up that plan. So looking at the plan, we decided to kind of reduce it down to resourceful city, a creative city, a resilient city, and a social city. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'll just kind of highlight the social city, because that's actually more about not just, you might go, oh, that's people having fun, just chit-chatting, but it's actually how do we move people through city? How do we make our public realm a lot better? How do we make it inviting to people of all ages, which fits in with a lot of work that Mariana was doing with the CCAC and looking at public realm and road reallocation of road space. So just as a local authority, in terms of what Mariana was doing with the national government, our responsibility is active modes. So we've had a long time of looking at how do we support people to choose sustainable modes of transport rather than their personal car. So, but we didn't want to say reallocation of road space here, because that sounds very technical, very engineering, and that takes out, you know, the vibrancy, the creativeness, the fun aspects of why we go out in the city. So Mariana met with a few of us, and we were kind of talking about how do we make it about the public realm. But just to say, one of the other things that we're doing, so this is how we ended up meeting with other people. Mariana interviewed a lot of internal staff who are higher managers, and they were interested in actually how do we make it reimagined in the public realm. So she spoke to them, and we really made it clear that it wasn't a climate action team initiative. So she spoke to them, and then that kind of came to our next challenge, which is our next slide, which, oh, sorry, we'll just skip over that one. I kind of covered this, but this is, so we were looking at how do we transform the climate action plan and actually make it more collaborative. So this is what this project is about. It's actually, well, we're focused on this one aspect of social city here, but it's how do we get people to think about when they're doing a housing project under resilient city, how does it actually link to the social part of it? How do we help people move? How do we be creative about it? How do we engage the arts with it? How do we use our libraries? How do we use all of ourselves as resources to get that systems approach and get more interdisciplinary working going across? And sorry, just a little bit more background to how we ended up with the 4, is we actually sat people down in the room internally and just asked the question of, what do you want Dublin to look like in 2030? And what does it feel like to you? And it was really interesting to see staff kind of go, why are you asking me? I'm just supposed to do a job. I'm the cycling officer. I'm the engineer that does that. But then would we kind of push people to think about, like, you live in the city, you have a stake in the city. We started to see different ideas come out, and that kind of confirmed the direction we're going. But then further interviews led to the final kind of more focused challenge that we ended up with, which is children's movement through the city. How do we ensure that they walk freely and have a playful way? Because currently one of the ways that we do this is the final slide for my bit, is we have school zones. And this is a bit of nepotism, that dog is mine. We have been putting school zones across the city, but we're still struggling with the challenge of, we've marked them with these awesome bollards of pencils. We have yellow and red dots along the road to say this is a child space. We used a little bit of funding from Creative Ireland and engaged an illustrator to do a little booklet to capture children's views of how they're walking through the city. So this school has been really great about it. But the idea here is my dog likes to enslave me and have me cycle him through the city in a backpack. Prefers it to walking because he obviously has 3 legs. But it was a way to communicate with kids to get their perspective of how they feel about the school zones, but how they also feel about the city. So to give them a voice. So it's a challenge still, because what we find is a lot of parents don't understand how to use the space still. Some parents think it's appropriate to just drive their child to the front gate, never mind the safety of another child. So we're trying to really address those issues. And so that builds on the work that Mariana's doing, and I'm going to hand everybody over to her.
Many thanks for that. So I will be briefly talking about the approach we are taking, or the underlying logic around this project. So talking about a systems and a challenge-led approach. In a nutshell, what we're trying to do is to create spaces where people in the Dublin City Council get to think and work differently than what they often do, to maybe reframe certain questions, ask questions that they do not ask in their daily work, not necessarily because they don't think of them, but they are running a city, they need to turn off fires every day, and that urgency sometimes does not lead the time to asking some important questions that may be less urgent to what they need to solve. The first step is really about creating this space and this time where they can think and work differently. And what we observe is that by the way the institutions are organized, and here the Dublin City Council is not an exception really, we see that we tend to solve problems linearly. I am in charge of one part, the other person is in charge of the other part, and that is not very aligned with the reality of the systems and of the problems that the city brings. This is why we are bringing a systems approach and a challenge approach, and I will explain the difference, and I will also explain why I'm calling them 2 different names at the end. So as Martin was saying, to serve the complexity, we need to be able to understand. To understand it, we want to understand it all, of course, but we can understand much more than what we do with any linear approach. And that is why we are bringing a little bit of a systems approach to move from solving problems in isolation and focusing on improving parts towards a systems approach, where what we're trying to do is help policymakers see the systems functioning as a whole, and then try to work together toward taking a challenging approach to transform it, to get to a better functioning system and better results. I will briefly explain what we mean by a systems approach and what we mean by a challenge-led approach, and why we think the combination of both can be powerful. You know, many of you may be familiar with the systems approach, so I will go fairly fast here. There are a number of mindset shifts when we move from thinking analytically, we take a problem, we split it into parts, towards a systems approach, One of them is moving from parts to the whole. Another one is from moving to linear to nonlinear relationships. Another one is from reductionism to emergence. The results emerge from the way the system is structured. And another one is from disconnected different departments, for example, to connected. And Alex was talking a lot about that as well in her presentation. And Sabrina also mentioned that as the logic underlying the climate action plan. Just for those of you that are introducing a systems approach maybe to your organization, one mindset shift that has been particularly useful for us and that helps people see the difference between the current way of thinking and system thinking is the first one, from parts to the whole, because it's one that we can illustrate. For example, when you think in parts and we're trying to, for example, reduce emissions from transport in the city, if you think in parts, you think, okay, where are emissions coming from? Most of them are coming from individual vehicles, or let's electrify cars. But when you take a systems approach, you actually ask, why do people choose cars rather than active or shared modes? And then you see that you need to look at how the system is organized, and in particular, how public space is allocated across different modes and how that impacts decisions. Sabrina was talking about the rethinking of the public realm, and that is what this project is about. We did, as she mentioned, a study in 2022 in Ireland, where we saw a lot of that. The objective of this study was to identify the actions with the potential to decarbonize transport. And what we saw was that a lot of attention was focused on the part in the National Climate Action Plan. 2/3 of the emissions were supposed to come from vehicle improvements. And what we saw is by taking a systems approach is an untapped potential, because the road space reallocation and how public space was used was there. There were initiatives looking into that, but they were receiving less attention than the improvements of vehicles. And it was about, this report was about providing recommendations to rebalance that effort. Both are necessary, but today the balance is, our attention is focused on part, and that's more priorities given to those policies. What we saw in a nutshell is that people were choosing cars over sustainable modes, and this is very important for the challenge based on children, because we see cars being one of the main dangers for children to be able to walk and cycle autonomously. And what we see is actually fairly simple. There is a gap in attractiveness. Cars provide more access, they are faster, etc., and thus people choose them. This gap is not there by chance. It is a result of a system structured in a certain way, and policies can redesign that system and revert that gap. We found 3 policies, and I will go fairly fast so that I link this to the challenge approach. What we saw is that if we wanted a city or a territory where people could walk and cycle safely and playfully, we saw from a systems approach, and we use here coastal loop diagrams, stocks and flows analysis, mindsets analysis. I can tell now if useful. We saw the importance of redistributing space. We saw the importance of connecting active and shared modes. In particular, today with technology, we can do a lot with shared private services, and connecting that to the public services can increase the attractiveness of shared modes. And also communicating, letting people know why the changes were done. Sabrina mentioned the importance of the vision and of actually having a shared direction where we go towards. Now, Sabrina was part of that work, and when we talked again, almost 2 years ago, she came to me saying, "This is all very nice, but if I need to implement it in the institution where I am at," and again, Dublin City Council is not particularly different to other institutions, "I don't have the right structure to do it, because this type of policies require a type of collaboration for which we are not structured for." And that is where a challenge-led approach comes in. So we talked about the importance from moving from seeing parts to seeing systems. But then, of course, the way most institutions are structured lead to each department having competencies on parts and no one having competencies on how the parts are organized. And that is where really a challenge-led approach is around working together towards systems, functioning, and moving away from the situation where actually I am focused on one part, the other department is focused on another one, and the third department may, by focusing on another part, put barriers on the others. Not bad intentions, just the way the organization is structured. That's a challenge that approach wants to take us to this direction. I have a few other slides to explain a little bit in a different way what we mean by a challenge-led approach. We have people in different departments, currently in silos in a way. And just to mention that silos and departments are there for a reason as well. They are very useful for a number of things. And the idea is not to make the silos disappear, but to create opportunities for working outside of those silos when needed. And when disruption is needed, as Alex was mentioning, then the silos may not be the right way to organize. So we're creating this space that we're calling the Challenge Delivery Team for now, where we connect people from multiple departments. We do that through workshops, and Sabrina will tell you more in a second. We see also the need to expand that team and to have allies within the Dublin City Council that help us deliver this challenge. No department or person alone can do, but the agency increases as people work together. And we know as well that the Dublin City Council cannot alone. We need an ecosystem of actors outside of the Dublin City Council that facilitates that, schools, local communities, etc. And here I will. So the role of the Dublin City Council, as Marielle and Alex were saying, this idea of the public sector being an enabler, we're using the analogy of an orchestra conductor, right? An orchestra lead. The Dublin City Council cannot, so the challenge is a little bit the song that we agreed to play together. The challenge, the Dublin City Council needs the musician to play that song, and is really the conductor of that ecosystem. I will conclude just with a terminology disclaimer and then hand the floor to Sabrina again. I am splitting the idea of systems approach and challenge-led approach. And of course, a challenge-led approach can be part of a systems approach. The reason why we are splitting it is that we see that the idea of a systems approach is very broad and can be very confusing because there is a lot there. There are tools to identify high leverage points, where to intervene. There are tools to describe the process we go through. The reason why we split it is really just a pragmatic reason. We are using a systems approach to identify for the tools that help us see the system, understand the system, and identify high leverage points. And we're using a challenge-led approach more to describe the process for implementation of those actions. Over to you, Sabrina.
So what are we doing and where are we going at the moment? Next slide, please. Or do I have power to? So again, as Mary mentioned, we actually officially kicked off in October 2020. In October 23, we've had multiple interviews with people. Maybe we would just go through, put everything up. So there was interesting pieces of getting people to understand how the climate action plan impacted them. And just to say, we had to do a public consultation in October 2023, and then so we couldn't change too much in the climate action plan because of the legislation, but we just restructured a bit so that it actually made understand some of the implementation pieces behind it. When we launched, we did our first series of workshops with executive managers. And just to kind of give a bit of context, in Ireland, we are very hierarchical, but the exec managers who each have large portfolios of responsibility, like my exec manager who has climate action, but also waste management services and a bit of fleet. And then another executive manager might have human resources, or another exec manager might have active travel or transportation. Innovation might be even another. So we wanted to have at that level because they're the ones that advise assistant chief executives and ultimately the chief executive of what is happening, provide that policy advice. So they have key powers to make decisions. So they were the ones that actually determined the challenge focus around children and their movement through the city. So they have bought in. And then where we're at right now is we had the first meeting this week. It went really well, I feel. We just finished, 2 days ago. Sorry, just a bit, we're at another project meeting today. It's been interesting to get people to see that them kind of forming the team and understanding how, as Mary has mentioned, we've taken a systems piece of approach, but we are seeing it emerge. People are starting to understand how they're part of the system. They need to talk to another coworker, and that everybody has their ideas, and I think, Alex, you were mentioning how sometimes when you bring something positive in at these meetings into the room, they slowly start to change. We did actually witness that happen. There's still a little bit more nudging to do with a few more people, but we'll get them there eventually. But it's interesting to see how people even who were originally bought in could actually just change a little bit, because we also, this one, we actually had people walk through the area, and we've picked an area that's quite challenging, but it's good. So then kind of the next steps for us is to kind of meet again, bring the team together, and with the view of having a workshop with the broader ecosystem of actors. It's interesting is Dublin, we really have to learn how we engage. We recently have one of our key actions in our climate action plan, and delivering on a reduction in emissions was challenged recently because of how we didn't engage disability persons organizations. And it's a very specific terminology in Ireland that I won't go into, but we have to be very careful of how we engage and how we bring stakeholders in. So right now the project is very much internally focused and building our team capacity. And we're slowly going to, between now and September, just build that team's abilities, make sure we have the right people in the room, and that they're aware of support for exec managers. I think that's the end of this slide. And then more broadly, finish hopefully by December. And then because we're part of the mission, this is also part of our pilot activity report, be able to disseminate these lessons to other cities. And then I'm going to hand it back to Mariana for the final slide.
Over to facilitators.
Thank you, Sabrina and Mariana. Yeah, fascinating. I was trying to hurriedly take notes while remembering I was facilitating as well. And I forgot a couple of times, I must admit, but thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Both really thought-provoking presentations, and I would really love to hear how it works out. So maybe we can get you back maybe end of this year or start of next year after there's been some more results there. I can see there's a lot of questions on the board. Please do keep dropping questions there. We will also take questions during the panelist question session, which will come up next, but we will take a 5-minute break. It's just gone 5 past the hour here. So if we can be back at 10 past the hour, we will kick it off very on time. I'll see you all in 5 minutes. Gone too far. Welcome back, everybody. Although we have 48 seconds left on the Miro board, but I will jump that timer. And in the interest of pushing forward and getting to actual questions, because it seems there's a lot of interest here. So Marielle will be running the next session, so I'll hand across to her to put the questions to our panelists. Thanks, Marielle.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for fascinating insights. And this has generated a lot of questions. You've probably seen that. And I'm not sure we're going to have time to go through them all. But perhaps Alex, Mariana and Sabrina, if we don't manage to answer all these questions in the session, perhaps if you were able to go into the Miro board and answer those questions afterwards, that would be fine. This link will be valid after the session as well. But first of all, I can see that there's lots of common threads, obviously, between your work. One thing that I picked up was this idea that actually it's all about, you know, relations and people and changing mindsets. Were you surprised about that and how it seemed to be quite easy? Was it easier to shift mindsets than you had anticipated?
I don't mind going first. I don't think it is necessarily easy to shift mindsets. I think what it is easy to get people to almost like realize that that there needs to be shifts. Like people can say, yeah, we shouldn't work in silos, but we don't want to do this, but there's always like a but, and then they're showing what they really think. But my department works like that, or and so they can have like a willing mindset, but they are also within their mindset, all the like structures and patterns and unwritten rules like are playing this huge part. So like unpicking that I found really hard. Like it's easy to get people, maybe easier to get people to be supportive in that way. But I think just thinking about what one of the things that and I've talked about this, like shifting ways of being together, that really challenges mindsets, because it's shifting all those other things like power, and then suddenly people, they're like, oh, maybe I don't think that if I'm having to give away power. Sorry, it's quite noisy. Sorry, it's quite noisy around here. And so when you put people in a position that challenges their mindset, that potentially is when you're like, oh, then maybe their mindset needs a little bit more work, and there needs to be, when they have to make a decision or give money or something, that is a little bit harder, but is possible. And we did move in that direction, but there are things that get in the way. I maybe made it sound really easy.
Did you find it difficult to shift mindsets in Dublin?
It's exactly as Alex is saying, is always like, but I do it this way, but I do it this way. So when we did the first workshop with the staff to understand, like, this is the climate action plan, to get over that hump of, it's a laundry list of actions that you have, we actually made sure people felt they had a stake in the city. Because one of the things that happened when we did the first plans was, I remember talking to an engineer who was responsible for all the cycling lanes. And I asked him, well, would you let your daughter cycle? Absolutely not, was the answer. It's not safe. I'm like, how old is she? 17. It's like, well, why is it not safe? There's no lights. I was like, well, who does public lighting? Turns out it was the gentleman sitting right in front of him. So had he been talking to him all the time, like, he could actually help do that. So getting people to understand that we're all still human, and understanding that we all have a stake in the city and how we develop it. And sometimes we're the 68% that don't have time to vote or object to something, and that we're that voice, was kind of the way I ran the next workshops to do the new plan. So first thing, people sat down, what's your vision? And then it was bit of the backcasting of like, what's the barrier? Like, what are the challenges? What do you want the city to look like? That was really interesting, whether they were an engineer, somebody who was a landscape architect, an architect, or a planner, or just somebody who does admin work. They all wanted a safe city, lots of cultural activities to do. And so just working back from there and then having the conversations, like people started to share personal stories. And just to say, the other thing that we're doing to kind of build that's parallel to this process is we're doing storytelling events to get people to share the challenges that they've been facing. Sometimes we're such a big organization. There's 6,000, just roughly under 6,000 staff in Dublin City Council. So you don't always know what somebody's doing or what somebody else is doing. And our comms team, they try to do that as best possible. Like we have monthly meetings, but sometimes we don't get the interesting detail, what your personal struggles were to understand how you moved up that grade. So giving people inspiration has been a way to do that. So getting people to talk to each other has been the main thing to get over that barrier.
Could I just add to what Sabrina's just said, but in thinking about those conversations that Sabrina's talked about and the conversations that we've had and all the exercises and methods that we've probably both used in this, it's not necessarily just a case, and this is kind of, I don't know, might sound like common sense of applying the method, but it's a culture in which it's being applied and the mindset of almost like the facilitator and the convener and coming with that like humility and openness and listening and not getting people's back and navigating the existing system to be able to enable people to feel heard, enable people to feel validated and valued and like they rather than just telling them to shift mindset. So I mean, like creating those environments is paramount.
So speaking of possible resistance, what has been kind of the greatest challenges in this? Because you've sort of touched upon it, but you talked about the need for political buy-in, obviously not lecturing the people in the room, giving them an opportunity to kind of move into the process on their own and stuff. But, are there some things that you would have done differently knowing what you know now about kind of the resistance that you faced, and would you have navigated that differently? Who wants to start?
Go for it.
Sabrina.
Sorry. I think just for myself personally, having done the first plan and the second plan, the biggest difference I would have done, I think it's different being an outsider versus an insider. Once you're an insider, you're part of the group, but sometimes you're not, because there's other ways you're still an outsider. If I could rewind the clock 10 years, I think I would have fought a bit harder and being able to do that now, and just giving people the space to say something and, fight it, like getting people to be open to conflict. And it was actually really interesting. I haven't said the word, let's have a fight about this or let's have a conflict about it, or because I think one of the things culturally, Irish people don't like confrontation. We really learned that this time, but it was interesting. Somebody actually brought up the word conflict. I think that it's actually a natural part of that. So we're just starting that conversation to say let's get comfortable with this and be okay with those uncomfortable conversations. But what we've done differently this time is made sure we'd have really good snacks on time at every workshop. We've made sure we've had good food, because that really does break down a barrier right away. Because then you're like, oh, well, this is, did you enjoy that one? Did you not enjoy that? And it's a different, and then you start having those stories of personal stories. So I think that's the one thing I would say anybody do, is make sure whatever you're feeding people and that you're feeding them on time, giving them good coffee, that's the big one.
Is good food important in the UK as well, Alex?
Is very important. And actually, I think what's interesting is I don't know if people have worked in the UK civil service, but you don't get even things like tea and coffee provided. So like when you go to something and it's catered, almost it's being taken seriously. So I feel like, yeah, good food is very important. A couple of things, and just looking at the board as well, someone's written about you know, the current government decides to criminalize rough sleeping, but this work's going on at the same time. Like we still live in a democracy and with elected members, and politics doesn't work just on evidence and on what's working well. It's also about public opinion and time and context, and is the wider system and world ready for something. There's also like the politics of like party politics, and then there's the evidence as well. And I think we like need to recognize that. And you look at something like Parliament, and it's the biggest co-design session going, really, and so there does need to be a recognition that you can't control the whole system, but you need to be able to, and I talked about this in the presentation, that the team needs to be able to know what their strategy and plan is to then navigate system 1 to get to system 3, horizon 1 to get to horizon 3. So now that Changing Futures team and the people in that coalition around it, and I think Mariana talked about like you've got kind of the core people and then relationships into the system. You've got that strategy. So when the time comes, when the opportunities arise that can be pushed for, they've got the things that they need to say, this is what we're going to do. You're not waiting until you're given permission to create the thing and then it's too late. So you've kind of created the ideas and have begun to test them. And then the other thing that I'd say, if we did it again, we like one of the hardest things was extracting Policy Lab from the process. And so we became so embedded in the Changing Futures policy team and the wider network of people. We built really strong relationships, which was all brilliant for the project. But when it meant after 9 months, our commission had finished, it was very hard to know how to hand over certain bits of the work to. And so I don't think we thought that through well enough, that kind of transition, that convener role. And then we did kind of we had a lot of work to do in that handover and helping the policy team roadmap to what's next, different roles in this, how to do that. So I think if I did it again, I'd work closer to bring allies in that convener role from immediately, to be able to kind of co-lead it. I did write something else down.
Like almost train the trainer approach. So you would want the system actors to be able to do it, and like Dublin has thought of this kind of delivery team.
Yes.
Okay.
And our policy team is outstanding and excellent commissioners. But I was like, oh, like who's going to get people together? Who's going to run the workshops? Who's going to keep the momentum going? So that was a challenge. And oh yes. That'll be enough for now. Carry on asking questions.
Great. So you've sort of touched upon this, kind of, you know, how you follow up outcomes and results, and you know, Dublin was starting with this enormous Excel spreadsheet that became a bit unmanageable. But if you were sort of able to think about, I mean, bottom line, can you see, for instance, in the health area for this target group that you were working with, did you see any kind of changes in how the services working, particularly locally, were thinking about, you know, what is appropriate to follow up on? What would be the appropriate targets to measure impact from a different way of working going forward? How far did you get with that? And also, in terms of Dublin, how have you adjusted your kind of targets along the way so that there's an ownership in the organization for being able to actually live up to those, by working in a different way than this kind of systems focused way? So difficult questions, but nevertheless, we're all interested in knowing how you what you think about indicators and outcomes.
I think impact is really challenging, and I see these questions and we ask them all the time around systems work, because it's really hard and you want 10 years to measure impact and you need the right circumstances, and there's so much outside your control. I think we were very much measuring impact as in for policy lab to enable the policy team to walk away with a plan with actions to take to create systemic change, but also that additional kind of values piece and coalition like added to, for us, the impact work. The impact of the project in terms of the way that policy teams are working together in this area is really strong and is changing. I think what's interesting is the UK government, the UK civil service political system is at a really interesting juncture in time. And, you know, it's going to be an election year. There's strategic decisions being made about how different departments and strategies act and when they bring things in, being really mindful of like what's coming. So there might be delayed impact to kind of into the next government. I'm being very cryptic, but there's challenges around that. I think what's really interesting is because we worked with a really diverse group of stakeholders, from those with lived experience to more senior, and went to lots of local areas to deliver this kind of workshop that I talked about at the end that helps them reorientate their local system. There was big impact in those areas in terms of commitments from different services to working together in different ways. It was not long enough to see people living longer or having better outcomes. But the other thing that I would just add is I think the challenge for national government is that it is hard to be really innovative because, or they might find it hard because, you know, the press, the media are always trying to, they feel pressure from the media, you know, to do the right thing. And if they slip up, an innovation often doesn't go to plan, or there's different consequences. There's this, you know, in the UK, they might say the Daily Mail effect. You don't want to be on the front of the Daily Mail. And we, in local government, there is still pressure around media, but there's less pressure. And what we really saw is there's much more, in several local authorities in the UK, like a desire to, not a desire, sorry, the kind of levers to be able to do something quite different and try things out and in this sector. And that was really exciting and interesting, and potentially has quicker effect because there's less bureaucracy that it's got to potentially go through, if that's helpful.
Is that the experience from Dublin, Mariana and Sabrina, that, you know, you're more able to do things quickly, have an impact?
I mean, Dublin's like a capital city. So when I say local authority, I'm not thinking about London. I'm thinking about small areas in England.
Fair enough.
So
fair
yeah,
enough.
I think you probably have similar challenges in Dublin, but
maybe let me comment first on the indicator side of things, and then how we're going about as well trying to get this challenge delivery team into action as soon as possible, so that they get to work together. So in terms of indicators, indeed, and there is as well a little of a mindset shift, because we are often used to having a policy and seeing what is the direct impact of that policy, and that of course leads us to think about policies that are not pushing on the highest leverage points that we know are indirect. So a mindset shift is needed there. The way we did it just a few days ago is that rather than thinking about indicators in themselves, we did, if I need to use a fancy word for it, a little bit of a backcasting exercise. Basically, we asked the people in the challenge delivery team to imagine that the challenge had been achieved and that they had transformed a child-friendly neighborhood already. There was an international journalist that visited the area and did a viral social media video walking around the area. And they needed to draft the script of that video. And before that presentation, we asked them to pay attention to how the journalist defined success. So that actually they were thinking about indicators based on the characteristics of the system she described. Often indicators are at the level of results, at the tip of the iceberg, and do not say much about the characteristics of the system we need to get to, and thus they are not very useful as a compass to change, right? And thus we were trying to get that, and that was a little bit indicators on how do we know that the neighborhood is now child-friendly, a little bit the challenge as an end. And then the second part of the exercise was saying, well, this same journalist want to meet the people that made that possible. So they go to the Dublin, she goes to the Dublin City Council and interviews you, asking you questions on how you work differently, how you engage actors, how did you communicate, etc. And there as well, we ask them to think, okay, how are you defining success in 2026, imagining it is done? And that's through the presentations, they identified indicators that could help us with that. That is more about a challenge as a means, a challenge as a way of working differently. And that's through that visioning and coming back, it helps us, I think, getting to a lot of indicators that we're not measuring. We asked that question as well, which ones are you measuring today? And also got us to the discussion on how technology can help us measure a few things that were impossible to measure a few years ago, but now we get to measure at the very granular level, etc. So that was fairly useful for us to do. Sabrina, maybe you want to...
Dublin, well, it is a capital city. It is probably, we have a governance is very top down. So we don't have as much power. Like I mentioned, we only really have control of active travel routes, and that's all we can do on the transport side. We're told what to do otherwise. So there's a lot that we don't, like we're controlled of social housing, but we don't really, we have building inspectors that go check retrofit housing. We do run the homeless regional executive. But in terms of like the giant Excel spreadsheet, and to Mariana's point about like getting people to think differently about the indicator, the story behind the indicator. Like, why are we measuring what we're measuring? Like, you can measure something and say, I had X number of meetings, but what does that tell you? Like, what actually improved? So kind of what we did with the climate action plan this time was the thing that I did very differently was actually try to embed health into the plan itself. So like, let's look at what the health indicators are like. So whilst we have the 51% and the neutrality target at a national level and a city level, we also have these other things, because emissions aren't going to be reduced directly by all actions. Like, you could directly reduce emissions by changing our fleet or changing our buildings, but there's the behaviors that indirectly influence, but those are measured in other ways. Like the example that we like giving, the reason for this is we can build the best cycle lanes, but if people don't use them for other reasons, like it's not safe, how do you measure safety? So we have to change how we're thinking about it. So we're using the social determinants of health. We're really at the beginning of that. But the other thing we changed is not doing one action, one indicator, one KPI, because that leads to big spreadsheets. So what we did was we did a series of indicators that would kind of tell us the story of the group of actions. Like, so for the social city, there's a bit of how many people are cycling, but like, is air quality improved? Is water quality improved? Are we seeing increases in biodiversity? Are we seeing a reduction in noise? And those are things that we're all currently measuring. But the problem with that is the silos. So the silos currently, one person does noise and air quality, another person does water quality, and that's reflected nationally. So what we're trying to do and use the mission, the EU mission, as well as this activity, is to kind of get people talking together so that we can actually go back to national government and say, this is how we need these different stakeholders who own data to sit together so we can actually all monitor this properly and understand how we're going and measure improvement. And just even saying, talking to the health service executive, one that we know nationally needs to be done is Ireland has an overstretched hospital system. But for us, the ultimate KPI there, if we know we're doing all the climate actions, like the number of trolley beds is going to be reduced. So it's just how do we look at them differently, and we're trying to do that. So
long-term perspective.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for great insights and good answers. And I hope I've covered some of the main questions here. But it's time to move on to our next area, which is call for action. So what do we actually do now? So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Martin.
Hello, everybody. 1.5 hours. No, over 1.5 hours. I hope everybody is still got some energy left. This part is going to be all about you and, of course, the speakers. Because from aspiration to reality, one key thing is that, well, if you know the hero's journey, you need a magic sword. What is your magic sword to think, to believe that you can move from that silo into a bubbling world of action and hopefully systems change? And so we have on the Miro board, and if somebody can share that, because my computer is crappy today, as is my Wi-Fi. So I hope I'm up, and if I'm not, please pick up. On the Miro board, we have 3 questions for you to fill out. And my proposal is that you take, let's say, 2 minutes, because I know you're quick. Let's take 2 minutes for you to blab on your answers to 3 questions. So the questions are, what tools or approaches do you recommend to introduce systems approaches in the public sector? For instance, I put one of my favorite books there already. The second question is, what would you recommend as a first step? So action when you would apply it, what do you recommend there? And the last question is, what is the most relevant, useful, best advice you ever got, or maybe you heard today and that you would like to apply in your own setting? So please, let's take 2 minutes. In my clock, that's 37, and I know there's a Miro clock, but somebody can put that on and be really appreciative. And let's dump all those answers in, and then we'll go over them. So what do you love? What do you want to share about what really works? What's your magic sword to beat the dragon of the silos? Mechanistic world. And I won't sing, but I would wish that someday we'll do a music part here, like, you know, like a little music where everybody's working. Next event. If you can, dump the link in right away, or the image of the book, the visual, whatever you like. You can do it later too. You do not want to hear me sing, it's very bad for the event. I've done musicals, and they said he can act, but he shouldn't sing. Look at that. Everybody's busy. Very good. And don't forget that last one. What's the best advice you heard today? Or maybe you got from somebody else. There's bonus points for Yoda quotes. In seconds and counting. And of course, soon I'll be going over them. So feel free to just continue.
I think Martin has frozen. Could that be?
Yes, he has.
I think he has.
I think so, yeah.
In a
Lost Martin
sentence.
briefly.
He looked very
I'm
determined
sure
there.
he'll be back.
I'm sure he'll be back.
I gave him a minute, but he's
Yeah, he's not
He's not
usually
coming
that
back yet.
quiet. Brilliant. He'll be back in a minute, I'm sure. So very, very interesting things coming in here. Thanks for sharing. Good stuff.
Well, they'll give you another minute to just be more generous than Martin. Add a few more links.
Nothing wrong with generosity. It's good. Yeah, particularly like good food aspect of it, you know, that's and she'll introduce that. in every session. That's a limitation with digital events, isn't it? No catering.
Hard to cater for, aren't they?
Exactly. The catering is rubbish. Oh, well, fabulous. Great.
Come
Well,
back
should
in yet,
we,
but I don't think he has.
no, should we
You wanna-
zoom in on the first bit here, what
Yep.
publicly available tools? Thanks,
Here we go.
Paloma and Isaac. So some familiar things there, the iceberg model. For those of you who haven't seen that, it's quite useful to show that you need to take into account things that aren't visible. So what's under the surface. That's great. 3 horizons. We got a good overview today. What else do we have? Theories of change. Yep. Can be useful. Absolutely. I'm not sure what the AI governing is, but sounds interesting. Maybe missing part of it.
Want to add to that?
What else do we have here? If you go up a
Oh,
little
Martin's
bit.
back.
Martin's
Welcome
back.
back, Martin.
Yeah, the innovation compound here has crappy Wi-Fi, I'm afraid. I think it's all the
dear.
quantum changes we're doing. Sorry about that.
It's a cyber attack.
Quantum cyber.
Yeah, we just started
My
looking at
apologies.
this
Yeah.
call to action, Martin, for your information.
Sorry, what, Mary?
We started looking at the first bit here, the call for action.
For action.
What the different things. So there are some familiar ones like the iceberg and 3 horizons, things like that.
So which one do people want to call out? How about that one? So I say flip your mic open and share it. You know.
Yeah, sure. I'll go. I'll jump in. I
Welcome,
actually,
sir.
thank you. Maria, who's also here today, introduced me to this framework, and it's to your left. I don't have my mirror open. Design journeys through complex systems. So it's really practical tools, and they provide the PDFs and things so that you could print it essentially and take it to a live workshop or use it digitally. So I found it very helpful. So thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Very practical. Oh, and I think even a Dutch author, J. Holland. Yes, very good. Anybody else who wants to share something they put in there?
I'll jump in if no one else wants to. It's Andy Wilkins here. I put in there the 3 horizons, and as a conceptual tool, it's really powerful. But I've recently run or facilitated a session with the leaders of one of the UK's integrated care systems, which are these sort of systems coming together to try and improve population health. And that was
You're dropping in and out if that's not me.
And it was a facilitated session to bring together sort of hospital leaders, council leaders, primary care leaders, voluntary sector leaders together to take them on a journey to reimagining what a shared future could look like. If we were able to completely and holistically support the populations we serve to improve the quality of their public health, what would that look like? What would we be doing differently? How would we be working differently? To get some sort of shared understanding of that future that then starts to reveal what's the pathway of transformational cross-silo change that gets us to that place. So it's still, there's more to be done in this program, but it's an interesting way, I think, where 3 horizons has come to life and seems to be working quite effectively. And if anyone wants to find out
have a link to that specifically, because it's not the standard 3 horizons, am I correct?
It's probably a slightly different use of it. It's rather than looking at sort of innovations that sit in the 3rd horizon, it was more around what might a shared vision, a shared way of working that we could be adopting that then reveals the sorts of bridging systemic innovations that help us to get there. So it's a slightly different use of 3 horizons, but it seems to be working well.
There's some backcasting there, I hear as well. I love
Backcasting,
that.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
love that.
backcasting comes in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we should jump to one of the other box and go through there. So people, yeah, the bottom one. So the first step, who wants to call out something there? And I see Alex has her hand up. And Alex, nice that you put your hand up. We're doing this.
I've actually just got something to add to what Andy said. It's really interesting. Sounds like a great piece of work. There's a book by someone called Graham Lester called Transformative Innovation, in which he uses the 3 horizons in a similar way. So that might help people kind of with a good practical example of what Andy was talking about. So just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Good. Somebody else. Maybe somebody has a question about one. That's also good. Or story.
I've been just looking at these a little bit, and I think what's really interesting is there's lots about engaging with people, talking to people, working with people it comes back to what Sabrina, Mariana, and myself were talking about relationships, like bringing your thoughts out into the open. There's like someone's written, draw a rich picture map with someone else of what you think is happening, that type of thing. Just get going, just do together with other people rather than on your own, I think is a really good, very simple first step. Might be more challenging, but
I think your colleague from Ireland was just also saying that like you make it personal, like my
Martin is breaking up again.
Lost Martin again, but I think that the human element is, and I understand, Alex, sometimes it is harder, but certainly one of the things that I've seen and experienced myself is sometimes the tools are a bit daunting. And if you haven't applied them yourself or seen them applied before, they can be a little hard to use the first time. So just starting and having the conversations and building relationships and having the good catering. I know we sort of laughed at it, but it's actually quite effective. It builds a shared story, right? And that builds connections, and that starts the ball rolling. So, Mariana, put your hand up.
Yes, and maybe to what you were mentioning, that is as well what the SI community is about, right? It can be daunting, it's difficult to identify, but that's where, for example, you have that exchanges space where you can ask a question and people having used it may be able to help, etc. At least that possibility to ask people questions and be pointed to resources I could have never gotten on myself has helped me a lot. And I think it's a resource that is maybe underused today, but just encouraging you to ask questions in there. Someone will probably respond.
Martin, I think you've unfrozen.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. The Wi-Fi here. I'm again in an experimental house here, and I'm now on my phone Wi-Fi, which also is spotty. But hey, it keeps again. It's like a network, goes in and out, like a system.
Jump to the last question here.
What's your favorite advice? Call it out, people. I like that system. I'm not going to read it for you. I'd like you to tell me. Or the others. Somebody's being called out. Who put that in? Tell me. And somebody please explain humble inquiry. Sabrina.
Sorry, I was just going to come in because there is a question that I saw on the thing of what's the most, I'm going to paraphrase, the most unique thing that we've done. And I think at the very beginning of this process for us, that it links to the storytelling. And it's the only reason we got the storytelling in was we hosted an event and I chose not to listen to my supervisor. And I had a comedian close out the event because he had just written a book on his own book around climate action. It's just because it's such a heavy topic. And the panel was heavy. And then he came in and he just changed our perspective on it. So that's kind of led us to, and he actually does do storytelling events. So for us, it was a good idea. And that he's since been poached by a department to do other things for me or for them. So I just, that storytelling comes from like, cause there's humor attached to it. But I think sometimes we're in heavy spaces and policy can be heavy, but sometimes seeing the humor in something is actually very powerful. Like I think one of his jokes is, a funeral is a great way to have a conversation about solar panels. And I'm going to screw up the bit that he does, but what that person did or how that person lived their life. I think humor is an important one.
Very good. I like the long time frames to realization. It's never Chronos, it's always Kairos, if you're familiar with that.
I think one thing I've taken away today is the importance of building coalitions, which is always, always critical, but also coupled with that, recognizing that people need their silos and that silos, specialist groups have a use, particularly for people feeling like they have somewhere to escape back to when they've been swimming around in the messiness of the wider system for a while. So I think actually making space for both of those to move out and then retreat is really important in these processes.
Like that, yeah. Acknowledging both, and that you can move, lean into one, lean in the other whenever you need it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other ones we'd like to call out on the way to the end of the hour, the top of the hour?
Well, I was very pleased to see that Mariana was using some of Joss's SI network pictures in the presentation, and I think that sort of really is important, to visualize what we mean, because it really brings the message home. So thank you for that. Thank you, SI Networks, for providing those good tools and pictures that helps us talking about these issues.
You, everybody, coming through to the last point now. The board will be open for quite some time now. So if you haven't gotten everything you want from it, rest assured it'll be there for quite some time. But we will now close. It wouldn't be a chat without a picture of a cat, I suppose. I just saw somebody drop a rainbow cat into the chat. Thank you, Faisal. Yeah, close the session out. But the segue from Marielle is quite nice about the SI hub. Yeah, we're all on the hub. If you did want to connect with us there, it's a great way to do it. If you haven't been there, there's a mountain of content that you can go through and lessons and so forth. So there's just some links there to the hub, to where you can get some updates on LinkedIn as well, where the recordings are stored on YouTube in case you missed the first session or want to see any of the other hubs sessions. And just a bit of feedback there to help us with our next session. And my final point is, what our next session is going to be about is still up in the air. We've run sessions quite regularly for the past 2 quarters or 6 months, and we're having a slight break over the summer, or European summer. It's going into winter here. We've got probably 2 or 3 months before we'll host our next session. So we're keen to get your input on what that should be, and we'll post some questions on the SI Governance Hub page. So please, dive into that and give us some suggestions. To be very well received. But thank you once again to our speakers, Sabrina, Mariana, and Alex. That was excellent. Yeah, I have pages and pages of notes here myself, so I've learned a heck of a lot. Thank you so much for that. Tony, raise your hand. Or it was a rogue hand. Maybe you intended to clap. I'm not sure. take it as a clap. Thank you all, and I hope to see you on the SI Hub or at our next session or both. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you next time.
Many thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.